Before we begin to look at the plays in any detail, there are a few terms that it might be helpful to demystify. And the first of these is the difference between what is called verse and prose. You may have heard people refer to Shakespeare's verse, or say, "How wonderful the verse is," or words to that effect. But you may also have heard that certain characters talk in prose and therefore wanted to know what the difference is. The two different forms do often help to convey interesting facets of a character, and so just being able to recognise them first is the key. We can discuss at a later date what each of the different forms helps to convey, but my intention here is just so you recognise it when you see it on the page. Luckily, this is very easy to do. So just have a look at this text here. So you're going to notice that there are capital letters at the beginning of sentences, and it runs across the page pretty much like a novel. In fact, I've just reproduced here the first pages from two different versions of Wind in the Willows. They're laid out slightly differently, but you can see that the punctuation is the important factor. And actually this is the same with Shakespearean prose. All you do is you follow the sentences. And as I said, I'll explain elsewhere why Shakespeare uses prose from time to time. But the important thing here is you recognise it. Now, in contrast, let's have a look at some dialogue laid out in verse. And you should be able to see that it's laid out very differently. The first thing to notice is that each line begins with a capital letter. You'll also notice very broadly that the lines are relatively short. They're normally around 10 syllables long, but again, we'll go into all the detail about that a bit later. And verse can either rhyme or not rhyme. Either way, it's still verse. Okay, so that really is all you need to look at. So let's just have a look at this other piece of text here. Bearing in mind what I've told you about the difference between prose and verse, what do you think it is? I'll give you a few seconds to think. And you should have come to the conclusion that it's verse. Why? Because as you can see, it's laid out with capital letters at the beginning of each line. So, very simply, we now know that we can identify verse versus prose. Next thing we need to do is to have a look at the form of verse that Shakespeare tends to write in, called iambic pentameter, and we're going to do that in the next video. Give a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video and subscribe now so that you never miss any of my future posts.